With the countdown to training camp less than a month away, it's time to take a way too early look at what the 53-man roster could look like today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Hey, Chiefs Kingdom, welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We are here 5 days a week for you. Thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. I am your host, Chris Clark. Thank you all for listening. We do appreciate it. Again, you can find me at Chris Clark NFL on Twitter. You can find me over at Chiefs Corner, where I talk about the salary cap. I talk about the Chiefs and their statistics when it comes to the quarterback play during the season. Going to be doing a lot more roster projections over there and talking about how this roster is going to take shape, getting ready for the 2025 season. Going to be talking about this roster and how they're preparing to go back to the Super Bowl in 2026. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. Go check out FanDuel.com. We really do appreciate the sponsor, FanDuel. They are great. Thank you so much. We're going to talk about this roster. We're going to talk about who I think is going to make the roster before training camp starts way too early. We're going to talk about potential surprises much later in the show. In the next segment, we're going to talk about the defensive players on the roster and who could make a case. But we're going to start with the offense. And where does it get the most complicated? I'm going to be looking at this from the perspective of there's going to be 53 players on this roster. I'm going to break it down looking at offense, defense, and special teams. And I do believe that it's probably going to be really close to 25-3 when we get down to it. I will go ahead and say off the start, I don't think special teams changes from last year. It's going to be Butker, Ariza, and Winchester. I think those are going to be the three that are going to make it from that. But let's get into the offense. This is where it's going to get a little interesting because Kansas City has a situation where in previous years, they've only taken two quarterbacks, and that's generally the way that they've done it much of the Andy Reid era. I don't think that changes this year. While it's possible that they like what they see from Bailey Zappi and they may decide that they need to make a move, because of the other roster positions and because of other issues in trying to keep players on this roster, I do think that it's quite possible they only keep two in Mahomes and Minshew. Those are going to be the two guys that are going to be the QBs for the Chiefs this year. I don't think that there's anybody else that is going to be on it. Zappi has a chance to make a push for the roster. We will see if he does that during training camp. Going down the list, running back is the next one I'll take a look at. Isaiah Pacheco obviously is going to be on this roster. I think Kareem Hunt is already on this roster, unless barring him not looking like the runner he did early in the season last year for the Kansas City Chiefs. If he has lost a step or two and he gets into training camp, maybe he isn't on the roster, but I do think he's going to be on it as of right now. Elijah Mitchell, I think that they signed in the offseason. I do think that he will also make it. Rashee Smith is going to make this roster, and I think he's going to make it as a returner. We will see if that ends up being the case, but right now I have four running backs on my final 53-man roster. If you start going and looking at the wide receiver position, if you would have asked me 2 months ago, I would have said Rashee Rice is not going to be on the original 53 because I thought it would be suspended. At this point, it looks like he is going to be on the 53-man roster. His court case has gone nowhere, and I do think that he makes the roster in the final 53 because of that. Hollywood Brown's going to be on the roster, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Jalen Royals. We know all four of those players. There's a log jam of guys competing for spot 5 and 6. And I say 5 and 6 because they know what they have in Juju Smith-Schuster. If he shows up and doesn't look like he did last year at any point, then I think that it's possible he could lose his position, especially if you get a guy like Tyquan Thornton that shows up and shows why he was picked in the second round. But for right now, I have Juju Smith-Schuster making the roster, and I also have Nico Remigio making the roster because of special teams play. I think he's their best returner that they have right now. Could be between him and Rashee Smith, so we'll see if that ends up making things change a little bit. But right now, I've got 6 wide receivers on my roster. Kelsey and Gray are the 2 tight ends that I think they're absolutely going to keep. I think Jake Breedingstool makes this roster as of right now. And I say that because I don't think Jared Wiley is going to be on the roster to start. I think he's going to end up on the PUP list. I think he's going to be a guy that is going to come back late in the season from his injury, and we will see if that ends up being the case. But I only have them keeping 3 on the roster as of right now when we start talking about how this is going to work out for the 2025 season. This is where it gets complex and this is where it gets messy. I have a lot of different ways that this offensive line could go. They have a lot of different players that could make cases to make the roster. I think the top 5 are pretty set, and not necessarily set at their positions, but definitely set, and probably the top 6 or 7 are set as making this roster, maybe even 8. But past that, it's a question of who's going to be starting and who's going to be on the roster, just on the roster as a backup. Jalen Moore is going to be on this roster. Kingsley Suamati is going to be on this roster. Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Juwan Taylor. We know all those guys are going to make it. I can't see them moving on from Wanya Moore, so I'm adding him as a 6th. Obviously, Josh Simmons is going to be on this roster. That's going to be 7. And I think Hunter Norzad is pretty much guaranteed a spot as well. So that would be 8. The question becomes, what do you do with Mike Caliendo? I think he makes the roster. I would almost put him ahead of Hunter Norzad, to be quite honest. So you might even be 9 deep at the offensive line position right now, as it stands for Kansas City, that are more than likely going to be on the roster regardless. The big question is do they keep 10? Do they keep even more than that? They have a lot of talent at the offensive line position, and it's questionable whether or not they're going to keep a guy like CJ Hansen, who was a 7th-round pick in 2023. So I wonder if they're going to do that, or if they're going to go and keep the guy that they kept last year that didn't play at all until the very end of the season, and Ethan Driscoll, who made an impression in the preseason and in training camp. If they keep him, that would be 10 offensive linemen that get you to the 25. I do think that that's possible if they go that direction. And I do think that it's probable that he's going to be on the roster as it sits right now. That's how I get to my first 25. Obviously, I already gave you the 3 special teams players, which I think are going to be, again, Butker, Oriza, and as of right now, Winchester. So to me, I think that there's your top 28 offensive and special teams. When we get back, we're going to dive into the defensive side of the ball right after this. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the greens, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. Are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. That's open the FanDuel app today. That's either use the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. The defense is a little bit more complicated than the offense. You have questions at a couple of different positions. Obviously, we kind of have an idea as to where they're going to go, mostly on the offensive side of the ball. But you do have questions at some of the backup positions when you start talking about the defense. Again, at this point, I've left 25 players available for the defense. I do think that that's probably around how it shakes out. Kansas City has sometimes been 26, 24. It really just depends on the roster and who they feel they can get on the practice squad. At defensive end, Minihue, Mike Dana, Karlaftis, FAU, and Gelati are going to make this roster. I believe all of them are locks to make this roster. I do think they're going to keep 5 defensive ends going into the season. The nice thing about keeping that many defensive ends is you have Minihue, Dana, Karlaftis, and even FAU to an extent have all broken down inside and play defensive tackle at times. And there's questions whether or not Gelati can do that as well. So that gives you an option if you decide to go shorter at the defensive tackle position, because maybe you want another offensive player, or maybe you want another defensive player for some of the guys that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Chris Jones obviously is going to be on this roster. Norman Lott's going to be on this roster. Mike Pennell and Jerry Tillery, I think, are both going to be on this roster. That gives you 4 defensive tackles. I talked on Monday's show that one of the questions that I have about this roster is, are they done at that position? Can they go and find a defensive tackle to fill in and give you more snaps, give you some pass rush, give you a compliment to Chris Jones. Obviously, like I said just a couple minutes ago, it's possible that they just go with what they have. Defensive ends can break down inside, give you some of that pass rush, but it would be great to have another defensive tackle, especially a young one if they could find it, to bring in and have on this roster. And the key to that, as I said again yesterday, is signing Trey Smith to a long-term deal. If they get that done, they can free up anywhere between probably 13 million, maybe I would say probably 13 to 15 million at max that they're going to free up by signing Trey Smith to a long-term deal. That should be plenty of money to be able to get them to be able to sign another defensive tackle, or maybe make a trade for him for one that would get them another young position at that play at another young player at that position to help them on the defensive line. Moving back to the linebacker position, this one is kind of set as well. Nick Bolton, Leo Chenal, Drew Tranquill, and Jeffrey Bossa are all going to make this roster. So you have your top four. Then it becomes a question of who do you feel like is your next guy when it comes to special teams? Is it Cole Christensen? Is it Jack Cochran? Is it Cam Jones? I'm going with Cam Jones for right now, but it could just as easily be Cole Christensen. It could just as easily be Jack Cochran, or it could be another guy that we will talk a little bit more about, a potential surprise, because I think he's going to make a case for himself in training camp to maybe get that fifth linebacker spot. That is a key special team spot, and it is huge for Dave Toub. Let's move it back to the back end of the defense, the full back end. Jaden Hicks, Brian Cook, Mike Edwards, and Shamari Connor, I think, are going to be your four safeties. Is it possible they keep a fifth in Deion Bush? It's possible, but they'd have to go short elsewhere. I don't see them keeping five safeties this year. It honestly also depends on what they end up doing with Shamari Connor. There's a lot of questions whether or not he's going to play the CB position, as they've had him at times in minicamp and in OTAs, or are they going to actually use him as a safety where he really excels back in space and being able to play the robber role at times. I think that he should be the guy that is going to be at the back end of the defense or playing in that robber role and playing more of a safety role versus them trying to put him in as the nickel corner. So to me, I think that he makes the roster, obviously, but I think that his best position is safety, and I hope that they put him back there and they go that direction, because I think that's the best use of him and the best way to get all of your players on the field at the same time. The logjam is really at the corner position. You look at the offensive line we talked about, they're probably going to keep at least, they have probably 9 guys that you feel pretty comfortable saying are absolutely going to be on the roster. Maybe even 10 are going to be kept. At corner, that means that you're probably not going to be able to keep all the corners that you want to be able to keep. And I do think that there's a chance that there's going to be an odd man out that just got a 1-year deal for the Chiefs this year. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But obviously, Trent McDuffie is going to be your starter. I still think Christian Fulton is going to be your number 2 CB. I think that he is going to get healthy before training camp starts, and then he's going to step into that CB2 role. That's, I think, what they signed him for, is to be that second outside corner and to take over that position. Then the question becomes, is it Jalen Watson as your number 3, who is generally going to be an outside corner, which would also mean that you would be shifting a guy like Trent McDuffie inside and have him play in the slot when you go to a 3-corner set, which you can do, but that's the big question. Is it going to be Jalen Watson as your corner 3, or are they going to go a different direction and are they going to keep McDuffie outside, Christian Fulton outside, and they go with a guy like Roland Wallace, who I do think makes this roster. He showed the ability to play multiple different positions on the defense in the backfield last year. I do think that there's a lot of value there. I think he's one of their better nickel corners, and that is a position that is very hard to play. And I think you want to have McDuffie playing outside, or have him being able to move around and travel with the wide receiver in certain situations. So to me, it would make a lot of sense to have a guy that you feel comfortable with in Roland Wallace, and I think he's going to be on this roster as maybe corner 5, maybe corner 6, really just depends, but I do think they're going to be looking at keeping 6. The issue that they run into, though, they have probably 7 or 8 guys that you would feel like have a chance at making this roster. They can only probably keep 6 of them. Noah Williams is going to be a guy I think that's going to maybe potentially challenge for some playing time late in the season. So I do think that he's obviously going to be on this roster as a 3rd-round pick. I don't think that there's any chance that they let him go. Joshua Williams is a guy that they really like his size. They really like his ability, but he hasn't put it all together yet. I think he still has one more chance to make this roster because his size is so different than anybody else that they really have at the position, and they like the length, they like his height, and he is a core special teamer, even though he struggled at times in special teams last year and caused some penalties. But the problem with that is that leaves a situation where you have now basically made it Najee Johnson expendable. You gave him $3 million this year, and he is now going to be a guy that's on the outside looking in for this Chiefs roster. And I do think that that is potentially going to happen. He has not been able to stay healthy. And maybe that's the situation as he ends up getting injured during training camp and it becomes a moot point. But right now, as it stands, I do not think he makes this Chiefs roster because I do think that you're going to have the two Williams on this roster, Fulton, Watson, McDuffie, and Roland Wallace as your corners. That is what I'm looking at right now. Obviously, there's a lot more to come when we're starting talking about this roster, how it's going to shape out. And training camp is going to have some very interesting battles that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. This is the fun part of talking about this roster and how it can be built, getting them ready for the 2025 season and getting ready to try to take them back to the Super Bowl in 2025. I think that there's going to be several positions that are going to have some very hard. You have a lot of young offensive talent that came in as undrafted free agents. You have to wonder if there's another guy that comes out. Paul from Washington is one that a lot of people liked. I know Ryan really liked him. Dalton Cooper's another one that there's a lot of people that think that he is somebody that could be a diamond in the rough. Is it possible that those guys make the roster? Possibly. I would think that it's more likely than not that they're practice squad players. But I didn't think Ethan Driscoll was going to make the roster this time last year, but he showed he had the ability to move in space, something that is not usual to find in guys of his size. So we'll see whether or not that is something that he can build on and have a better second season than he had season one. When you start looking at this roster, the other position, another position group that has a lot of players that you have to wonder, are they going to have a chance at making this roster? Sky Moore is a wide receiver who's been in Kansas City for quite a while. He's a former second round pick. You have to wonder, is his roster position somewhat safe because of when they drafted him? I wouldn't think so. But at the same time, they've kept him in the previous couple of years when I thought that maybe they could be moving on. So can he make a case for himself to make it in training camp? Is he going to show them something as a returner that would make it to where he would maybe make Nico Remigio expendable for the Chiefs? I don't see that happening, but he's somebody to watch. The other one that I think is really interesting at that position is going to be Tyquan Thornton. His speed gives him a huge advantage in this race for a roster position for the Chiefs. Can he show what made him a second round pick for the Patriots? Can he show them why the Patriots decided to draft him in the second round? If he can do that, if he can step in and be successful and get rapport and get chemistry with Mahomes, maybe he pushes a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster off the roster, who you know what Smith-Schuster is going to give you, but he doesn't provide something. He doesn't provide top end speed. He gives you a possession type wide receiver that can be valuable, but it's also something that you would think that they could probably get onto the practice squad if they needed to keep another wide receiver like a Tyquan Thornton. Other examples for wide receiver, Elijah Badger. Justin Ross has been here for several years. Can he make something of his time in Kansas City? Jason Brownlee is in Kansas City. Magdalena is in Kansas City. Those are guys that could possibly force their way onto the roster if they're able to make a big showing in training camp. And you have to also wonder, you have a guy in Jimmy Holiday who came in and was a tryout player, made it to the 90-man roster to get to minicamp, and now he's headed to training camp. Is he going to be able to show something? Did they see enough of him to maybe think that he has a opportunity to make the roster or at least the practice squad during the 2025 season? The guy that I think is going to really make waves and potentially make it a lot harder for the Chiefs at a position is Brandon George. I think that when you look at the way he plays and the fact that he wasn't drafted was really surprising. I do think he makes a push for this roster. I think that it's possible he could make it to where they don't keep Cam Jones. Obviously, that fifth linebacker position is going to be a core special teams guy, but it's also something that you have to wonder if they're going to be looking in the future and saying, okay, well, Tranquil, maybe he's getting a little older. Are they going to get a deal done with Chenal? Are they going to look at this and say, okay, is Brandon George somebody that can potentially start for us in the future and go that direction, because he does have a lot of talent? I think he's going to make a case for himself on this roster in 2025. One of the tight ends I didn't talk about was Robert Tonyan. I do think that it's possible he is going to make a push for the roster. I just think that when you look at what they have done and the players that they brought in, I think Breenstool gives them a little bit more growth potential. Tonyan is a guy that I think that they could trust to play right now. I also think, though, that Tonyan is a guy that they could easily get on the practice squad and they could bring up for a couple of games if they absolutely needed to. They likely are able to get Breenstool to the practice squad since he wasn't drafted. But the question is always going to be, does he show up in preseason? And is that going to make it hard for them to be able to stash him on the practice squad if he shows out in preseason? For right now, from what everything I've heard, I think Breenstool is a guy that gives them another tight end that they can maybe potentially build around in the future. And that's something that they're definitely going to need, because, again, like I said on Monday's show, I don't think, or like I said earlier today, I don't think Jared Wiley is going to be on this roster, at least to start the season in 2025. I think he's still getting back from his injury. He's getting closer from what it sounds like, but I don't know that he actually starts on the active roster. It could be where he comes back to the active roster in October or November. That's going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it. Let me know who you think makes the roster that maybe I didn't mention, or the players that I think that are going to be on the roster that you don't think make it. Let me know down in the comments on YouTube. I'll be sure to try to respond to those. Thank you all for listening today. Matt will be with us tomorrow, and we're going to have much more breaking down this roster, getting into the depth of these players and who could possibly help the Chiefs get back to the Super Bowl and win one in 2025.